In June of 2013, a game came out that made millions of players cry. Not from frustration or rage, but from genuine emotional pain. The Last of Us was not the first game to tell a story, but it was the game that proved video games could tell stories just as powerful as the greatest films and novels. Before this game, the industry had a problem. Games were fun, games were exciting, but most people still saw them as toys, something for kids, something that could never compete with real art. And then Naughty Dog changed everything. To understand why The Last of Us mattered so much, you need to know what gaming storytelling looked like before it arrived. In the early days, stories in games were simple. Save the princess, defeat the evil wizard, stop the alien invasion. These stories existed only to give you a reason to shoot, jump, or collect coins. They were excuses, not experiences. As technology improved, developers started trying to tell more complex stories. Games like Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII showed that players cared about characters and plot twists. But even these games had a weakness. The story happened between the gameplay. You would play for a while, then watch a cutscene, then play some more. The two parts rarely felt like one complete experience. By the late 2000s, a few games started to bridge this gap. BioShock used its world to tell its story. Half-Life 2 kept you in control during story moments. But these games still treated story as something separate from the core experience. They were still games first, stories second. The Last of Us flipped that formula. When creative director Neil Druckmann and game director Bruce Straley started working on the project, they had one simple rule. Every single element of the game had to serve the story. The combat had to feel desperate and brutal because Joel and Ellie were desperate and brutal. The quiet exploration moments had to give you time to understand these characters. Even the user interface was designed to keep you immersed in their world. Nothing could break the emotional connection between player and character. This decision created something gaming had never seen before, a story that felt completely unified with its gameplay. When you struggled to survive a fight, Joel was struggling to survive. When you felt protective of Ellie, you were feeling what Joel felt. The game did not tell you how to feel, it made you feel. But the real genius was not in the big moments. Anyone can make a dramatic cutscene. The genius was in the small moments between the action. Joel and Ellie did not just trade one-liners between fights. They had real conversations. They bonded slowly. They revealed their pain and their hopes in ways that felt natural. These moments were not interruptions to the gameplay. They were the entire point. The opening of The Last of Us became legendary for a reason that most people do not fully understand. In 20 minutes, the game made you love a character and then ripped her away forever. Sarah's death was not a plot point, it was a wound that stayed open for the entire game. Joel spent 20 years unable to heal from that night. When players met Ellie, they understood exactly why Joel could not let himself care about her, and they understood why he eventually failed to keep that distance. This was not manipulation, this was character development done with surgical precision. What made this even more impressive was how the game handled Ellie herself. Video games had a terrible track record with young characters. They were either annoying, helpless, or obviously just plot devices. Ellie was none of these things. She was brave but scared, tough but vulnerable. She made jokes to cope with horror. She asked questions that showed she was still a child in a world that forced her to grow up too fast. Ashley Johnson's performance brought Ellie to life, but the writing gave her something most game characters never had: consistency. She never acted out of character just to make a scene work. Her choices always made sense for who she was. The relationship between Joel and Ellie became the foundation that everything else was built on, and this created a problem that Naughty Dog had to solve. How do you make players care about this relationship in a game about shooting infected monsters and hostile survivors? The answer was environmental storytelling. Every location you explored told its own small tragedy: a child's bedroom in an abandoned house, a suicide note on a desk, skeletons holding each other in a flooded tunnel. These details were never explained. The game trusted you to understand what happened here, to feel the weight of all the lives lost. This made the world feel real in a way most games never achieve. But Naughty Dog went even further. They made sure the gameplay itself reflected the emotional state of the characters. Early in the game, Joel is cold and efficient. He kills without hesitation. The gameplay reflects this. You execute enemies without mercy. But as Joel starts to care about Ellie again, the violence becomes harder to watch. The game never changes its mechanics, but your perception of them changes. By the end, when Joel massacres an entire hospital full of people to save Ellie, the game does not celebrate this. It shows you exactly what he has become. A man so damaged by loss that he'll destroy the world's last hope rather than lose another daughter. This ending broke the unwritten rule that had existed in gaming since the beginning. The player character did not save the day. Joel damned humanity to save one person he loved. And the game asked you a question it never answered. Was he right? Some players defended Joel. He owed humanity nothing after what it took from him. Other players were horrified. He made a choice that was not his to make. Naughty Dog refused to give a clear answer. They showed you both sides and let you wrestle with it. This was storytelling that respected the intelligence of its audience. The impact of The Last of Us spread through the industry like a shockwave. Suddenly, every major studio wanted their own emotionally devastating story. Some succeeded. God of War reinvented itself by focusing on the relationship between a father and a son. The Witcher 3 proved that players would invest hundreds of hours in character-driven narratives. Hellblade showed that games could explore mental illness with sensitivity and depth. But even these games had a misunderstanding of what made The Last of Us special. They thought the secret was making players cry, so they added sad moments without earning them. They created serious tones without understanding how to balance them with gameplay. They confused being dark with being meaningful. The real lesson of The Last of Us was about unity. Story and gameplay were not separate elements fighting for attention, they were two parts of the same whole. Every mechanic reinforced the themes. Every theme was expressed through mechanics. The game was brutal because the world was brutal. The game forced you to make terrible choices because Joel was forced to make terrible choices. The quiet moments mattered because they showed you what was worth fighting for. This was not a formula other games could copy. It was an approach that required rethinking everything about how games were made. When The Last of Us Part 2 arrived 7 years later, it pushed these ideas even further. It asked players to empathize with the person they wanted revenge against. It challenged players to question their own bloodlust. It divided the fanbase in ways the first game never did. But whether you loved it or hated it, you could not deny that it was trying to do something games rarely attempt. It was using the unique properties of interactive media to create an experience no other art form could replicate. Looking back now, more than a decade after the first game released, The Last of Us remains a dividing line in gaming history. There are games made before it and games made after it. Before The Last of Us, games with serious stories were exceptions. After The Last of Us, they became expectations. The game proved that this medium could make you feel things as deeply as any film or book. It showed that players were ready for stories that challenged them, that refused easy answers, that trusted them to handle complexity and moral ambiguity. The industry learned that players did not just want to escape into power fantasies. They wanted to connect with characters. They wanted stories that stayed with them long after the credits rolled. They wanted to feel something real. The Last of Us gave them that, and gaming has never been the same since. To recap, The Last of Us changed storytelling in games by unifying narrative and gameplay into one cohesive experience, creating characters with unprecedented depth and complexity, trusting players with morally ambiguous choices, and proving that video games could deliver emotional experiences as powerful as any other art form. It raised the bar for the entire industry and showed what was possible when developers put story first. If you enjoyed this deep dive into gaming history, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss our next documentary. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on The Last of Us and share this video with fellow gamers who appreciate great storytelling. Thanks for watching.